Welcome to Cybersecurity Where You Are, the Center for Internet Security's podcast. I'm Sean Atkinson, CISO at CIS.
And I'm Tony Sager, Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist at CIS. Cybersecurity affects us all, whether we're online at home, managing a company, supporting clients, or running a state or local government.
So join us on Wednesdays as we discuss trends and threats, explore security best practices, and interview experts in the industry.
Together, we'll clarify these issues, creating confidence in the connected world.
Hello and welcome to the show, Cybersecurity Where You Are. I'm Sean Atkinson, CISO here at the Center for Internet Security, joined by Mr. Brian Culkin, TJ Sayers, and Kyle Leonard. Guys, how are you?
Doing great. How about you?
Doing well, Sean. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, I've got a little problem, guys. I need help with AI prompt injection, and I figured I'd assemble the experts to really discuss these thoughts, these elements. We also have a white paper that will link to this podcast, but really want to start and think about, TJ, in terms of how would you define AI prompt injection for a business or an executive audience?
Yeah, sure. Great question, Sean. So I think you can think of prompt injection as an attacker smuggling in directions into an AI model, and then that AI model acting upon those instructions. And we typically think of that in two senses. One is more technical, one's less technical. So the technical, we'll probably get more into this, would be like white on white or binary, or like embedding prompts in like a document or a chat session that the AI model is going to read through, and therefore you're injecting prompts into the model that it did not expect. That would be more like non-technical, and then or that would be a little more technical. The non-technical would be like you trying to socially engineer the model, right? So the model's not designed to do what you're asking it to do, but you're convincing the model to do those actions based on the prompts that you're putting into it.
Wonderful. Now, this follows on from an episode we did with Kyle and TJ before, and we've added Brian. Brian is our CTIO for CIS. So Brian, as we answer this question, could you just do a quick introduction about yourself and your role at CIS?
Sure. My name is Brian Culkin. My role is the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at CIS. I'm a longtime CIS person, been around. I got my 15-year little award in the mail a couple weeks ago, which is pretty awesome. But I'm currently focused on implementing AI across CIS, and so it's a couple of things. It's internal for our own use to make our folks work smarter, faster, stronger, et cetera. Basically help with our workflows inside the organization, but also to begin to look at ways in which we can start to incorporate AI into some of our products, some of our services, certainly into some best practices as folks are just hungry to learn more about AI and how to properly implement. So that's what I'm largely focused on these days at CIS.
Wonderful. So Brian, as we start to think of the integration, and we're looking at, a threat vector such as AI prompt injection, when you're thinking and doing assessment, and, we work very closely together on elements of this implementation, why is the urgency in the space as we start to see the rise of LLM-powered tools, co-pilots and Claudes and Geminis and things of that nature, and chatbot assistants? Why is this becoming so important?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's become more important because and we're seeing it at CIS, as we sort of evolve from just using general chatbots to asking simple questions. Well, now the next logical step is, what would happen if we could connect this to our email systems, or to Excel, or to PowerPoint, or to Slack? I mean, you name it. What enterprise tool wouldn't you want to connect this to? And so that is where the problem really exists, is that prompt injection, when performed by an attacker, now has the ability to potentially send an email, make a transaction, wire some money. I think that's the one part of it, but also too, it's now all those connections can also be leveraged as a way to insert prompts into the user's prompt. So how much I love an analogy. Think of an assistant that I've got that is looking at every single email of mine, PDF, Word doc, everything, and just parsing all of it and just consuming all of it. But perhaps one of those PDFs has got an additional bit of text that says, wire this money off to the CEO or off to some third party account. And so that is going to be processed all the same. I didn't give that explicit set of instructions, but that was also part of it. And so that's sort of the concept behind it. And I think why it's become problematic now is because of all the additional connectivity that we've given these tools.
Right. Yeah, the agency and the connectivity is so critical as we assess really not only the vector, but really the radius, as it were, in terms of influence. Fantastic. Now, Kyle, as we think from a CTI perspective, what signals or trends are indicating that adversaries are either actively exploring or weaponizing prompt injection?
Yeah, Sean. Well, we have to keep in mind we're still kind of in the early days of this. There's still a lot of advancement to be done with controls and detection mechanisms. But some of the things that I have seen, I've been mindful of is when considering indirect prompt injections, when having like external sources that end up going into a model for processing. I've been trying to be mindful of looking at websites that are compromised by threat actors or perhaps are originally created and owned by threat actors, or when we see samples of like phishing emails that have attachments, PDF attachments or something. I'm trying to be mindful of looking through the content of these files, the content, look for any kind of signs of instructions, maybe broken up into pieces, broken up into separate parts that could be segmented together, or functions that are taking encoded values, piecing them together. Some things like that. But still, like I said, there's a lot of detection and a lot of AI tooling to work for defense that's still coming around the corner.
Exactly. Well, I think that really leans into, Kyle, that we're at the tip of the iceberg in some cases in terms of the actuality of a threat capability in the space and how it will not only the utility that we see of prompt capability, but then obviously the misuse of prompt injection capability. But TJ, this leads us down a path. So we've got traditional input validation vulnerabilities, but prompt injection is a little bit different in this space. Am I right to think about it that way?
Yeah, definitely, Sean. And I think when a lot of people think of prompt injection, especially in the cyber community, they think of things like SQL injection, stuff like that. And in a traditional like application security stuff, you are trying to separate the code that's going in from the data that it's accessing. So it's like two separate things, the code and then the data. What's interesting with LLMs is like the code that the data you're putting into the LLM is also like in some ways the code, right? So it's by design. That's how the architecture is built, is that it's receiving the information you are giving it as the data itself. So like with SQL injection, you could like filter the queries, put parameters around the kind of queries it's having, so that you don't allow a form field to accept SQL related language. Can't really do that with an LLM, right? It's expecting human language to be in there to receive the feedback it's going to provide you. Same thing with like cross-site scripting. You have like output encoding, things like that. There's actual like clear defenses strategies and mitigations that you can put in, because that type of input is unexpected, right? Whereas with an LLM, human language is expecting human language, and it's much more manipulative. So even the frontier labs, like most of the big AI providers out there, kind of acknowledge that this is somewhat of an unsolved problem. If you think of like a web application firewall, you can tell it like anything that's going to have this pattern of like drop table or something, block it, right? With an LLM, you can't really tell it to block forget all previous instruction, or open up this message and then send an email to this address when you've queried the database for all the related information, right? It's just interpreting that information by design. So I think with LLMs, when we think of prompt injection, it's more of like you're trying to contain it. You're trying to contain the model and contain the capability of the model. You're not necessarily like fixing a vulnerability, inherent vulnerability.
Excellent. Thank you, TJ. Now, we're going to go to a quick break, but when we come back, I've got a question for Kyle on tactics, techniques, and procedures. We'll be discussing executive decision-making, looking at AI safety, AI security, and a governance perspective over all the new capabilities we're seeing in vulnerability management. But with that, we'll be right back.
Are you a U.S. state, local, tribal, or territorial government?
If so, you know just how difficult cyber defense can get.
You're the frontline defense against cyber threats, yet you don't have the shiny tools, big budget, or skilled talent of an enterprise.
Well, guess what? You don't need them.
You do need a community of like-minded folks to unlock the power of collective cybersecurity.
And that's the superpower of the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center.
The multi-state ISAC provides cyber underserved organizations with protections they otherwise couldn't afford at a price that works for them.
But it's more than just access to services. It's access to a community of peers where your participation protects them and theirs protects you.
Not to mention access to the 24/7/365 CIS Security Operations Center as your full-time public sector cybersecurity partner.
Available as a single organization or state or territory-wide option, the MS-ISAC membership provides threat intelligence, monitoring, and more to fortify your cyber defense.
Become a member today by visiting cisecurity.org/ms-ISAC.
Okay, we're back. Kyle, are there early indicators or TTPs that CTI teams should monitor?
Yes, absolutely. I believe Brian had mentioned RAG databases, for example. So with your RAG databases, your models have access to your data, increase functionality, reduce hallucinations. One of the things to be mindful of is prompt injections can result in data in the extensible databases being manipulated. That manipulated data can end up being used in output going forward. So it's important to make sure that you have input filtering on anything that's going into models for processing, making sure the information that does end up making its way into any kind of RAG database is monitored, check for log manipulations to that, and check for any irregularities or anomalies. This includes emails as well. That there's researchers have come out with attack techniques using RAG databases to result in sensitive information being included in the emails and emails being sent out to outgoing locations that are unexpected, which kind of ties into really a lot of network monitoring. If you can apply any kind of geo blocking, both inbound and outbound, those could be some indicators to look for any kind of anomalous related activity that stems from prompt injection attacks.
Yeah, Kyle, those are all really, really great points. I would also just call out a couple of things just beyond the CTI realm that organizations could look for as like suspicious things happening with AI-based tools in their environment. So you talked about RAG. So like some indicators of issue there would be like any newly ingested information using that RAG would be like, do you see white on white text? Is there like instruction like prompts in some of the metadata fields that are being ingested? Just like looking for things that it's not really supposed to be in there, and it looks like it might be trying to feed information into the model in a secretive way. The other thing would be like, especially if you have models public facing, if you see any input into those models, like repeat everything above that you've already discussed with other customers, or like forget all your prior instruction, or you are now, a blah, 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 right? Think if you're a public company or you're selling clothes, and then you see in the model, like you are now the competitor company, right? Trying to inject and get that model to behave in an unsanctioned way. You could look for those types of things in the input log for those models as like indication someone's trying to prompt inject or manipulate those models. And then obviously, if you see anything like base 64, shortened URLs, like, weird behavior that's coming out of the models, that would be another indication that the model is not behaving as intended. Someone may be trying to tamper with it, or it's misconfigured. Yep.
And let's not forget languages that are not commonly spoken. We actually even included one of our attacks, one of our reports recently, being able to bypass some safeguards on Copilot, ChatGPT, and Gemini. put your prompt in French, and it worked.
Brian, when we're thinking about CISO, CIO, and looking at AI systems, when we're thinking about a broader attack surface, we're starting to think of both the dynamics of the implementation of large language models. We're thinking about the utility of data management through MCP. Any thoughts that you've had in the space of both CIS's integration of AI, but really more broadly, how organizations should think about AI systems?
Sure. And when I think about this, I tend to want to reframe it slightly from, treating AI as a tool to really treating AI as it's almost like a new form of identity or like a person of sorts. So it's got access to data, it's got privileges, it can authenticate to certain applications, it takes actions, it processes input. And so you really need to kind of treat it that way. So I'd want to tackle it or recommend tackling it in a couple different ways. You want to inventory everything you've got. So making sure you know what AI tools you've got, what AI systems you have, and more importantly, what are they touching? What can they do? What are they able to interact with? Does it have any access to sensitive data? Prepare for things. We're talking about prompt injection. I think prepare for prompt injection and should it be successful, I think your best course of action is really to limit the blast radius of how bad or how much it could spread to. So kind of limit, and hopefully we'll get to talk about that later on, but least privilege and all those types of things I think apply and come into play here. So you want to, and it's a fine line that I try to run the balance on here at CIS is I want to be enabling and let folks innovate and play with technology, but also not so much so that it's free reign and so much freedom could really result in some bad things happening to our organization in particular. Should it go sideways? So we have to again walk the fine line of governance versus the innovation piece. I don't know if it answers your question, but
no, it does. Well, it really leads into this next thought, Brian, is the difference between AI safety and AI security. And I think we've got governance structures that very firmly assess least privilege, data management, etc. But then we have to think of AI safety in terms of hallucination, biases, and things of that nature. Seems like there's some misconceptions in that space. Is that the right way to look at the misconception, or try to reframe it?
I think that's right. I think so safety in my mind is what you're essentially putting on the vendor. So is the model behaving as it should? Is there any bias in its responses? Does it hallucinate? Is there any of that happening? So basically, is the model behaving as per spec? I guess what the vendor says it will do versus AI security. Whereas what are the attackers trying to do to try to make the model behave in a way that it wasn't intended to do? And so I think they're two different things. I think one is the partly the vendor's problem, and something that they need to manage. But I think that more importantly, I think the security component of it is the organization's problem. I think that is where we have to kind of step up and making sure that we're doing all the right things on the organization side to ensure that all the integrations are as tightly governed as they can be, that the data that you're putting into the model isn't poisoned. So for instance, some of the projects we're looking at CIS, we're looking at building RAG databases, and so we want to make sure that the data in those databases is not compromised in such a way that now the model is consuming it and then doing who knows what with the information. So that's kind of how I think about the two different distinctions.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that, because I guess how exactly as Brian's saying, the way that I think of it is like AI safety is more of like the providers of the AI models, like how they think of this. And when I think of AI security, I think of it as like, if we bring AI into our organization, how do we configure it properly? How do we make sure that it operates securely in our environment? Because you could have a very safe AI model with good guardrails built well, right? It's going to try to look for, bad prompt injection related stuff, but you could have it misconfigured still, right? You could have it public facing on your website and then it's touching an internal database, right? That's an AI security issue. So you could have a truly safe model, as safe as it can be, but then someone could still access that model and pull information you never intended them to be able to pull because you have it configured improperly, right? That's an AI security thing. So AI safety is like the vendors and how they build the models to make them safe. And then the AI security is like how we as consumers and organizations and end users actually configure it and use it within our environment. And that security element, if it's misconfigured, is how the threat actors then exploit that model in your environment. So least privilege, is it touching things it should not be touching? Is it in an elevated status where it can do like write on top of being able to just read things, right? So if you inject the prompt in there, can it wipe out a file share instead of just reading files in the file share? Stuff like that.
Well, I think that even then goes into this next thought is when we think about different regulated industries and how there's the deployment strategy from, and I've used the examples here of, I'll use finance, healthcare, and government. I think there's different structural approaches to both safety and the efficacy of what has been done in that space as a kind of a vendor risk assessment of what we're bringing into our environment, and then also the deployment and continuous care and feed of the model itself in terms of what it's ingesting and also what it's providing. Because we've seen some, I would call it hallucinations in terms of other chatbots moving in directions in terms of which they've not been necessarily trained, but are now making promises that they necessarily can't uphold or were never supposed to. But again, I think that's that dynamic agency that Brian had mentioned earlier is very interesting, TJ, in this space. Any thoughts there with regulated industry?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting over the next couple of months and the rest of this year as we see like the LLM space get more specific. So instead of just having a general LLM, you'll have, different models coming out for finance or healthcare or whatnot. That's a space that we're watching pretty closely. But I would say, generally speaking, in terms of prompt injection and AI and LLM related security, that a lot of the like foundational things that we've been touching on here, like least privilege, making sure it's configured properly, making sure if you have a model that's public facing that it's limited in scope and not going to be as robust as maybe the one you're using internally. I think those rules generally apply across all industries. Human in the loop is still a huge thing, even here at CIS. Brian coined very well something when we were going through with the teams about how like AI can make us fast, but the professionals that we have here are making the output right. So just keeping things like that into consideration. But again, to my earlier point, I think the specificity of the models when they get cater to those different industries will be interesting because they're going to have to take into consideration all the different compliances, right? You got HIPAA and healthcare. You have a whole bunch of different financial regulations like PCI and whatnot. You mentioned governments like SLTT specifically has always been a challenge to address broad sweeping, right? Because SLTTs touch pretty much every critical infrastructure out there: healthcare, finance, transportation, defense, right? So they'll be contending with this in a very unique way.
Agreed. Kyle, any recommendations or any thoughts on practical controls to reduce, these types of exposures that we've identified here?
Yeah. TJ had actually touched on a couple of them. Basically every big name almost requires human in the loop. Data tagging, have sensitive data, sensitive functionality, segmentation of that information, and then also human in the loop to have validation anytime there are references to it or manipulations to that information. One of the things that we all have to be mindful of here. CrowdStrike actually came out with a report in February of this year, strongly emphasizing that everything defense-wise needs to operate at machine speed. Everything's you don't have days, hours, weeks to patch stuff up. To find a machine seconds. You have seconds now. So defenses, all the recommendations have to be followed basically from the start. Design, functionality, and everything with security in mind from the get-go. because if you don't have remediation steps that operate at machine speed after the fact, you're gonna have quite some headaches to have to deal with.
You certainly are. And I think it's, Brian, when I'm starting to think of the governance structures that we want to put in play and the assessment strategies of the introduction of AI, I think it goes beyond that because it's continued care and feeding, right, over time. This is not a set it and forget it type of approach here. We need to build in a capability of kind of a quality assurance process of how the AI is managed, controlled, and also integrated. Because I feel one of the and to Kyle's point, some of these practical controls, if we're not aware, the model isolation or the model management could be exposed to other data sets. And again, leads us into that regulated piece. And now it has access to, private data, personal data, these types of things. So when we're thinking of governance, I think in the CISO perspective, I come in very risk averse. Here's all the bad things that could happen. And then I turn to you, the optimist, and says, whoa, hold on a second. Here's all the things that could happen. Yes, exactly. Here's what it can do. Where do we meet in the middle in order to manage the risk, but also not reduce the opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a challenge. I think the way we do it, I think, is a good approach. I'm not saying it's a perfect approach, but I think it's a very good approach. So what we have at CIS, we have an AI governance board. We also have a technical advisory board. So we have these sort of two boards. Governance, obviously, is governance piece, and I'll talk more about that in a second. We also have this technical advisory board that is more looking at the cool things that these tools can do, and what are the capabilities and that sort of thing. But I think that you need to have, regardless of which one you're talking about, representation from across the organization. So you've got the folks that are on it that are very pro AI technologists. You've got representation from folks on your team, from ISO, certainly from legal. You want to have folks on there from engineering, from IT, and so we really want to gather all the perspectives of everybody, because everybody is an expert in their own space, in their own realm, and looks at things slightly differently. So, whereas I might say, hey, Sean, I found this really interesting thing that Claude can do today. I don't see any harm in turning this on. What do you think? And you say, well, actually, there is a harm, and here's why, because you didn't consider this. I say, oh, well, that's great. I didn't consider that. But that's what makes us, I think, stronger, and as we work together on this stuff versus this, top-down sort of approach of one person in the organization, maybe it's me or whomever, saying, this is the way we are going to deploy AI, like it or not. It doesn't work. It really doesn't work. And so I think you've got to have the approach that is more broad than that. That is, bringing everybody into the fold and kind of figuring this stuff out together, because it's complicated and it's changing so rapidly. I guess the last thing I'll say, even on that point, on the rapid change of things, is, I may miss an article or two on something that just came out, and you or TJ or Kyle may have caught it and say, oh, well, yesterday that was a great idea, but today it's not, and here's why. And so it's just this evolution is just so fast that it's candidly hard to keep up sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It seems like there's a new acronym a day, and we kind of got to keep up to manage it. And what is very interesting, and a little off topic, but TJ, I'd love to get your thoughts, and Kyle as well. But you mentioned, Brian, as we start to read articles, and we've started to see a lot more in terms of vulnerability management in the AI space, detection methodologies, things like that. When I think of a governance structure of integrating such a capability, I think it opens up a lot of opportunity. I think there's going to be those that adopt and those that decay, if not following certain processes in the space to manage, Project Glasswing and Mythos from Claude, and then others from OpenAI with their cyber model now. I think it gives us an opportunity to look at governance from a security perspective, and now where that starts to integrate. And some are seeing it, this is going to be the avalanche of vulnerability. This is going to be, the detection methodologies we're going to have to apply, are going to have to adapt. Even the CVE program itself is going to have to be integrated with some velocity in order to start to manage and appropriate certain indicators and elements in the space. TJ, how do you see this moving forward? Is this, I think this is a whole nother episode, but we can preview it right here.
Yeah, so speaking of a lot of the public announcements from Anthropic and OpenAI on these new frontier models and what they mean specifically for cyber, I'll at least say high level. I think the short term, near future is a little bit alarming in the sense that we could see a lot of vulnerabilities, 0 days, stuff that was not previously found for decades, start to get found by some of these models. And then you'll see, actors trying to, maybe even with the assistance of some of these models, unfortunately, trying to build exploit code to exploit that stuff. So near term, I think it's a huge concern, but I'm actually very optimistic long term that this is a good thing for the industry. And the reason I say that is the same tools, right, that are looking and finding these vulnerabilities in code that was written, 2 decades ago or more, hopefully are going to be the same tools and even improved upon in the coming months and years that will be reviewing new code that's written. So optimistically, right, speaking, we would hope that with those capabilities built into the software development lifecycle, there will be less vulnerabilities overall in code. But I think it kind of gets back to what we were talking about as like a common thread and theme throughout most of this discussion, is that a lot of the basic cyber hygiene things, a lot of the ideas of like defense in depth, I think apply still, even in the age of AI, where the speed at which attacks and vulnerabilities are being discovered is much faster. You still need least privilege. You still need to properly configure things. You still need to isolate certain processes. We talked about isolating AI, right? In certain cases, you still need logging. You're still going to need red teams to look at certain tools in the environment, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want like AI to just be put into this like silo of like its own thing. There's still a lot of best practices. There's foundational things that have been laid all throughout the years in this industry that still very much apply to safeguarding infrastructure, even in the age of AI. And again, on the optimistic front, I think the near term is going to be a little challenging. Thankfully, some of the vendors have rolled things out to select organizations to kind of help lock some of that stuff down. But I think long term, right, we'll see hopefully less vulnerabilities and less attack surface as some of these tools are used right from the get-go when things are developed.
Yeah. Kyle, any thoughts there?
Yeah, TJ, it's so interesting you said that, because I remember a couple of years ago when we were doing a briefing on ChatGPT and Copilot, like they were brand new, and people were asking us, well, what do we do? Well, we're like, well, believe it or not, keep doing what you're doing. I know it sounds kind of funny to say, but keep doing what you end user awareness. Logging, like you're saying, principal, least privilege, all of these things, they still apply. Now, one of the main differences, not today, the models are an additional part of your attack surface, but still you're applying all those controls and everything that you already are familiar with now, involving this additional technology. So it's a little bit of keep doing this, do it faster, try to use AI to help you pick up that speed. But a little bit, keep doing what you're doing.
Very good. So, Brian, when we think of this now from an executive perspective, we're assessing not only the AI tool capability, the vendor perspective, the vulnerabilities, the safety requirements. It seems like we've got a lot of work to do.
We do indeed. We do indeed. And there's so many different tools out there and requests coming in daily for the latest and greatest tool from somebody on the team. And, and they're all well-intentioned, because I'm a technologist. I get excited by this stuff, but, we at the sort of the senior level have got to also temper that a bit. Every tool you bring in is an additional expansion of the attack surface, as it were, for us as an organization, in addition to none of these things are free, and they're all very costly on top of it. But I think that we just have to be mindful of that, and and continue to have conversations like this, and even conversations with vendors as we're looking to incorporate their latest and greatest tools within our stack, to make sure that they are thinking about the things that we are talking about here on this podcast today. I think that too often I've seen that every vendor under the sun has got AI built in somewhere somehow, and I jokingly said, I think maybe to you, Sean, at one time, it's almost as if everybody went through all their marketing material, did like a find and replace and swapped ML for AI, and that's what we've got today. And so it's functionally the same thing, or it may not even be artificial intelligence at all as you start to probe and dig deeper on this stuff. But I think it's important that when you do find it to be there and it does exist, that they are thinking through things like prompt injection and tool abuse and all, again, the stuff that we've talked about, and making sure that they have meaningful answers that are not just marketing hype, but are real tactical things that they are doing to help mitigate this stuff that we can then leverage in order to make ourselves and our constituents safer.
Wonderful.
Thinking too, just again, it's that same common thread of still harken back to a lot of the best practices, right? Like if you're going to work with a vendor, look at the contract language, see how they handle data, try to get their compliance results. If you can find out information about their supply chain or like other things that are connected into their technology, where are they based out of? Have they had any incidents in the past? Things like that we do for all vendors across the board in the industry, right? We still need to do that proactively, and maybe even more so with more scrutiny for some of these AI providers, because the marketing flywheel is going very, very strong, right? And us in the security space, we're in some ways trying to, as Brian said, temper what's being said, but also keep up with what's being rolled out, right? So unfortunately, it's sometimes very hard to implement, security at the speed that the market is moving at. But I completely concur. It's been very interesting to see over the years where you had like heuristics-based detection and then ML-based detection, and now everything's just AI. So is it really AI, or is it the same technology just with an AI film over it? And now you're paying a premium for it. So a lot of things to consider.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all three of you. This has been a great discussion. We've got, hours we could cover in this space. But I do want to thank each of you for your perspectives, your expertise, and continuing to push us forward in terms of both the utility of AI, managing the threat, and securing organizations. So thank you. Thank you all very much. Any questions, comments, concerns, reach out to us at podcast@cisecurity.org. Remember to subscribe at your preferred podcast provider. Catch us on YouTube at The CI Security. And with that, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the podcast today.
The thoughts and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect those of CIS.
Tune in on Wednesdays for a new episode. And in the meantime, visit our website at cisecurity.org.
Together, we'll continue our efforts of creating confidence in the connected world.